will be myself, Jennifer French, our senior contributing editor, Jeremy Koff, our senior consulting editor, and Jojo Platt, our contributing editor to Neurotech Reports. So these are the topics we're going to be discussing today. Some of these came up yesterday, and they're important issues. We, as an editorial team, will be commenting first, and then we'll open it up to dialogue, and we want to welcome or invite everyone to participate in the discussion. So the three topics of discussion today have to do with SCS safety versus regulatory delay. In particular, we want to see how should we as an industry respond to the public citizen report and other criticisms that have been leveled against the industry and against FDA supposed laxity in regulation. Second topic is cutting the cord, and this has to do with what can we do as an industry to help new investigators wean themselves off of government research funding and succeed in the marketplace. And then finally, the third topic is called Leave No Patient Behind. And here we want to discuss what we can do as an industry to make sure that end users and patients who are implanted with neurotech devices aren't left in the lurch if and when the vendor goes out of business. So let's go ahead and start. On the topic of SCS safety versus regulatory delay, I invited Victor Krauthammer, who was a presenter yesterday, and during his talk presented some interesting details from the Public Citizen Report. Victor, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Oh, great. So we'll be calling on you in a moment, and we want to be able to discuss some of the issues. And I think all of us would agree that not just with spinal cord stimulation devices, but with really any kind of implanted medical device, safety is of utmost importance. And the clear fact, as you have pointed out, as the report pointed out, there's still far too many adverse events. And these adverse events can take the form of lead migration. It can take the form of, lead breakage, et cetera. So it's clearly a challenge that the industry needs to confront, whether or not you have watchdog reports coming out. It's in the industry's long-term interest to make sure we can get that, probability of a successful implant well above 95 towards 99%, which is where we need to be. Jeremy, what's your opinion? You've been involved in the spinal cord stimulation industry for quite some time. What's your experience with the rate of adverse events, and where do you think the industry needs to be?
Well, first of all, I mean, there are certainly, when you look at lead migration and you look at the literature, certainly back in the early days, but it still continues to be a problem. It is high, and it's certainly been going down, but it continues to be a problem. But I'd like to take a step back and looking at what comes to mind, some other examples, and how does industry or company get behind it. So, I worked in insulin pumps where, in the early days, there were cases of runaway insulin pumps, of insulin being injected to the point where patients died. Obviously a crisis. Cochlear implants with Advanced Bionics, where, back in the early days, Advanced Bionics used ceramic housing, and they had issues of cracking, and the FDA actually put a temporary stop in implantation in kids. So again, here's a situation of a crisis by the company, and to a larger extent the industry. So in the case of all of these cases, and as it relates to spinal cord stimulation, this is Jeff Greiner used to always take this approach over at Advanced Bionics. He was the CEO, or the president, where always taking the high road, and you have to address the issue, but you have to do it in such a way that there's strong science behind it, You have to do it, I think, as a consortium where the industry, even though these companies compete, have to get together for the common good. And, in the case of SCS, these issues tend to span all the companies. It's not just specific, as an example with Advanced Bionics, that was unique to Advanced Bionics in terms of the crack cases. So here's an opportunity for the companies to get together and just keep plugging away at an improved product design and seeing how we can work together.
Okay. Jen, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I do. I have a couple of points here. I think one of the things that we need to think about as an industry is really, this is a cry for transparency, I think, for us to really start to address some of the issues that come with these implanted devices. And social media plays so much more of a role in the PR area today. One complaint on social media can just go rampant. So it's something we need to think about. I also think from an FDA standpoint, Victor pointed out yesterday, is that, the industry is being compliant, which is a good thing. But I also sometimes feel like we're damned if we do or we're damned if we don't, right? So those types of reports end up showing up, but we're being compliant, which is good. But it leads to data that we need to improve the design. But I will also notice that the FDA is trying to change the way in terms that they're communicating safety issues as well. So today, I'm not encouraging people to leave, but today FDA is hosting a public meeting, particularly about ways that they can better communicate safety when it comes to medical devices. And we have several people that are speaking there today. So please don't leave. The docket will be open until January 19th for public comment. And I think as industry, it would be wise of us to be able to make some recommendations to the FDA.
Thanks, Jen. That's really important. Jojo, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, actually, I think I have a little bit of a different perspective, which is the companies and the manufacturers and the distributors of the devices are.
It's hard to hear Jojo. I'm not sure. It shows that you're on mute.
Is Jojo coming in?
On the screen.
All right. Sorry, we can't hear Jojo.
How about now?
How about now?
Is that better?
Okay.
There you go.
Yep, you're coming in, Jojo.
Is that better?
So I think that
Okay, sorry about that. So I think that the other community that needs to be addressed in this are the implanters themselves. Was attending a potential candidate, attending their appointments with them to determine whether or not a stimulator was the right path. And I can tell you, lead migration never came up in that physician consult and any of the subsequent consults. So whatever we do with industry, we also need to make sure it gets downstream and that communication is, the messaging is clear and concise and delivered directly to the patient and the caregivers.
Okay, thanks, Jojo. Some good points there. I just want to bring Victor in for just a minute or two. And Victor, if I can, I want to just direct a couple of counterpoints to you. And these are just observations that we've made over the years as a publication covering the neuromodulation industry. And one of the reasons why we have been so excited about particularly the implanted neuromodulation device industry, both in terms of DBS devices and spinal cord stimulation devices and peripheral nerve stimulation devices, is that with each new generation of device, we as an industry and we as a science learn more about the function of the nervous system. So if you will, we understand, neuroscientists understand much more about neural circuits because of the fact that we have had hundreds of thousands of people implanted with stimulation devices, whether it's brain stimulation devices or whether it's spinal cord stimulation devices. And the other point I wanted to make is that with each new generation, we're getting better. Everyone knows about Moore's law, devices get smaller. They consume less power, and they have greater functionality with each new generation. And this is something that the implanted medical device industry can offer that the pharmaceutical industry can't necessarily do, which is to say we draw upon previous generations. And the only point that I hope that critics of regulation of implanted device keep in mind is that it's a two-way street. There's two types of errors that a regulator could make when it comes time to make a decision. Do we approve a device or do we not approve a device? And one of those is, there's two types of errors. One is the error where you err on the side of caution and maybe keep that device off the market for a few years longer. But in doing so, are we necessarily meeting the needs of the end user? So for instance, a couple of years ago, there was a wonderful session at the Society for Neuroscience that BlackRock Microsystems had put together. And they put together a panel of end users, including quadriplegic, including amputees. And one of the complaints that was specifically directed at an FDA representative who happened to be in the room and happened to ask a question was that, why are you keeping this wonderful new Luke Skywalker arm out of, why are you making it so hard for us to use it? Here we had the ability to use it in the lab, but we couldn't take it home. And there's this degree of frustration. So all I ask is that we understand that it's a two-way street. You can make an error in terms of maybe approving a device too soon. And I'm not talking about safety. If it's unsafe, you don't approve it. But I am talking about effectiveness because there's two factors. And when it comes to effectiveness, yes, you can maybe approve a device before you're 100% convinced that the efficacy is there. But if you keep, on the other hand, if you hold it off the market for too long, are we really serving the needs of the end user? So those are, I know that's a lot, but Victor, I'm just wondering if you could comment on some of those counterpoints.
Yeah, those are excellent points. And, FDA has, if you're in industry, you've probably had fights with FDA, but those fights are nothing compared to the kinds of fights that go on inside FDA.
I believe you.
And there were many fights about the Luke arm. Which I was in favor of bringing it out, and you don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. So
exactly.
So I agree. The other point that's really important is the type of trials. Jeremy brought up cochlear implants, which is to me has been a real success story over the 30 years I was at FDA. They started out with a single channel, just a wire that went into the cochlea. And now, because, and as you know, as we learn more about physiology, we've learned about the organization of the inner ear and the tonotopic organization and how that could be addressed through engineering. It's a real success story. And part of that is that it was always the way FDA regulated it. It was always a class 3 device, and the studies were very good. I'd say from all the companies, and from my perspective, that was my main device while I was starting out as in FDA. The studies were excellent because it was a class 3 device, and it was also a good example of a device where you don't need a control. If a person is profoundly deaf, it's silly to have a placebo control. And we actually did have that argument, and fortunately it came out the right way, where we don't need placebos for cochlear implants. That would be ridiculous. With spinal cord stimulators, it's a little different. It is in this muddled regulatory category. Some were class 2, some were class 3. Then FDA in 2001 reached kind of a compromise where we'll let the class 3 ones in, just based on literature, what we called a paper PMA, a PMA based on paper clinical data in papers. And I think that and it's important that FDA set the right bar for these things, and it was a little bit muddled. I know you want, the industry wants the best studies, you know, the class 1 studies, and and they've done quite a few. But if you look at what's in the FDA files, they're not there. It's most of the approvals are based on data from other devices that have been published. So, and that's hard for regulators to evaluate, because you don't have that much control over what's published in papers, and you know, there's no inspections, there's no oversight, probably no, they may have been done without investigational IDEs, without investigational device exemptions. So I'd say FDA has made, in retrospect, I could see that FDA has made errors in the way spinal cord stimulators are regulated. And even now, if you come in, like if you come in with a high frequency spinal cord stimulator, or these new devices, the dorsal root ganglion stimulators, you do need to do a study, which is a good thing. But the study is supposed to be a non-inferiority study to a traditional spinal cord stimulator. So you have to be not inferior to a traditional spinal cord stimulator, but we don't really know how, you know, the basis for that, because the cleared and approved spinal cord stimulators never went through their own clinical trials. So it makes it difficult for manufacturers.
Victor, that's a very good point that you
know
just
what
brought
to
up. The issue of this non-inferiority trials, yes, many of them are non-inferior to the previous generation of SCS device. I get that. Perhaps that's a valid concern, but the counterpoint I would raise is that what about non-inferiority with existing medical management? And this is something we've argued for many years, is that instead of restricting the access to this neuromodulation device to only refractory populations, if you were to compare how this device performs with the disease population as a whole. So for instance, whether it's depression in the case of DBS, or whether it's chronic pain in the case of SCS, let's look at the long-term safety record of drugs versus devices. And Victor, when we reach a point where SCS is killing 45,000 people a year, I will definitely think that criticism is justified. Okay, that's an extreme example, but if you look at depression, you know, where you have a certain percentage of the population, 30, 40, 50% that's refractory, and you've got to figure that a certain percentage of those, maybe 10, maybe 20%, are just not going to be able to be helped, either because the disease is too complicated, or maybe they have something else. To hold vendors of a neuromodulation therapy to a standard that says you have to reach 50% improvement in 50% of the refractory population, that's just a really difficult bar, given that drug manufacturers couldn't meet that by definition, since it's a refractory population. So anyway, I know that that's a whole nother discussion, and I don't want to linger on this too long, because we have a couple of other topics of discussion.
That is.
But I did want to say,
yeah, no, that's a very good point. The other thing we know about placebo effects, one of the things in those is placebo effects tend to be short term. 3 months out, placebo effects tend to go away. Regression to the mean is another issue, and those tend to even out over time. So I'm just getting that longer term studies and having a reasonable control. you're right. It's ridiculous. You can't do a placebo control with many stimulators. It doesn't make sense.
Okay, well, I think we have agreement there.
You could do low stimulation. Yeah.
I think
So
we have agreement
it's
there,
a problem, and I agree that comparing to other medical to other treatments is probably a reasonable way to go. And actually, the Declaration of Helsinki actually kind of mandates that. They're kind of not in favor of placebo controls when there are known treatments. So I think there are ways of doing other treatments, perhaps. Even though it gets kind of cumbersome, you can even have 3-arm studies. But that's a whole other topic of placebo controls and
okay,
how
it's
to
definitely
do
a whole other topic, and maybe next year we can continue
studies.
this
Yeah.
and have an in-depth discussion on placebo. We could easily spend a full hour talking about placebo
I
controls.
agree.
But we are out of time, so we have to move on to the next
Sorry.
subject. Victor, we want to thank you very much for your participation yesterday and for adding to our group discussion today.
Yeah.
So the next
It's a
topic
pleasure.
of
Thank you.
discussion for our editorial panel is called Cutting the Cord. What can we do as an industry to help promising neurotech investigators get from lab to market? And Jen, I want to give you the first crack at this one. What are your thoughts on things that the industry could do?
Thanks. Yeah, of course, I have to appeal to Andy's academic bombs that he threw last night during JoJo's session. I'm sure he's going to have opinions on this one. But really, just to throw it out there is that, do we have the right infrastructure and the right bonus mechanisms to allow promising investigators to translate their findings out of academia and into the marketplace? For some reason, we still have this cultural war that industry is bad, academia is good, and the two shall never meet. And I think we really need to change that from a cultural standpoint and from an infrastructure standpoint. I think one light at the end of the tunnel is part of what DARPA has been doing with their Entrepreneur in Residence program. As a funder, they're finding ways to couple the business side with the investigator side to help with that translation. And I think we have to look towards models like that to try to change the way that we try to translate technologies.
That's an excellent point. I'm wondering if anyone from DARPA is online. Al, are you with us? Or Scott, are you with us? If so,
Yeah, I'm here.
Would you like to follow up on that, since Jen mentioned the DARPA Entrepreneur in Residence program?
Yeah, I can a little bit. Is Scott online? It'd be better if he would speak to it because he's actually working the effort. I don't see him.
I don't see Scott online, so
yeah,
go ahead, Al.
I can speak to it a little bit. I don't work it directly, but I do leverage it. We've had a couple situations, performers across my portfolio, where we've asked Scott and the team to get involved. It depends where they are in their process of getting VC funding. I had one team that really was quite mature. Turned out that there really wasn't a whole lot there to do on the one team. So the entrepreneur team got involved. We actually teamed with PAO to also make sure that we were pushing the right press releases and the accomplishments that were happening on the program. So it was very clear from DARPA's perspective that we were behind the program. In other cases, they're getting involved a little bit earlier on. And I forget who mentioned it yesterday, but it really rung with me was, a lot of times the academicians just don't have the time to go out there and start to build a company. And so having someone that has this experience and working with the academician to talk about how you go out and build this and how do you find someone to help you down this path is really the critical time to get involved. And so they've been trying to get involved relatively early in the program. Once DARPA knows that the technology looks like it might work out, right? We want to get enough of the risk out of there that even DARPA is comfortable with it. And then it seems like there's a sweet spot for the embedded entrepreneur program to come in. And so they've looked at a number of different models. But the point is we want to identify the technology early enough so that we can start scoping out what the future would be on how we engage VCs and so on. So they have a whole process in doing this. They have a whole process of evaluating the company internal to DARPA. When does it make sense to get involved? Is it now? Is it a little bit later? They've had discussions directly with the PIs to talk with them on where they are in the process. And then they put together kind of a custom plan. It's not a boilerplate at all. It's very custom by performer on how to go forward. But hopefully Scott will join us a little bit later on, and he can talk much more about the mechanics of the program.
Okay, thanks,
end,
Al.
From a program manager on the receiving end, it's worked out very, very well.
Thank you, Al. Jojo, did you want to add anything?
Sure, and I think this is actually really Jen's territory, which is tapping into some of the philanthropic efforts supporting research and rehabilitation and commercialization. But I think there's actually, Jen, you and I haven't yet discussed this, but I think there's even a subset within the philanthropic market, which is, we all know about the groups that are indication specific, whether it's spinal cord injury or inflammation or any other disease state. But there's a whole group of funds that I think we can tap into if we can collectively make a pitch. And it's a group called donor advised funds. It's sort of this middle ground between private foundations and public charities, where individuals and family members are responsible for suggesting where these funds go. But we need to be able to access them and appeal to them. And we can do that en masse by appealing to some of the sponsoring organizations like community foundations. So if we have concentrations of entrepreneurs and investigators working together, say for instance, geographically or around a disease state or a technology, if we really get together, I think we can lobby to get in front of those donors and make our case that they should be throwing money our way.
Okay, thanks, Jojo. We're running a little bit behind, so we're going to move on to the third topic of our roundtable discussion, and this one is called "Leave No Patient Behind." Again, this came up several times yesterday. Examples of companies that had products that were working, neurotech products that the users were happy with. Unfortunately, for one reason or another, the company goes out of business, either for financial reasons or some kind of irregularity going on. And now the patients are left with no one to support them. So what can we do as an industry to make sure that we're protecting those patients, to make sure that they're not left in the lurch when a vendor goes belly up, if they're happy with the device? The three examples that we spoke about yesterday, most recently, Enura, a company manufacturing a TMS therapy for treating migraine. It was FDA approved, a lot, and also CE marked in Europe, and a lot of users were very happy with the therapy and upset when the company went out of business and there wasn't much. Some of them had, because it was a subscription model, some of them had actually paid for a number of doses, meaning uses of the stimulator, and they weren't able to actually get them because there was no one at the company to support the device. Prior to Enura, there was a implanted device company called ATI, Autonomic Technologies, that had a minimally invasive device for treating migraine. Wasn't yet FDA approved, but was approved at least initially in Europe. And again, there were examples of implanted users who were getting good results with the device, and now the company's out of business. Going back many years, Neurocontrol was a company that developed a hand grasp stimulator for quadriplegics, C5, C6 level quadriplegics. There were hundreds of users who were very happy with that device, but when the company went out of business, they were potentially left in the lurch. And fortunately, the FES Center at Case Western Reserve University stepped up to the plate and supported those users, but they didn't have to. So at any rate, let's explore what are some of the things that can be done. Jojo, I think yesterday you had mentioned an idea that someone had mentioned to you. Do you want to share that?
While you're reminding me exactly what I said, because I don't recall, I'm going to jump into two other areas for consideration. One is not just the patients who have received commercially approved devices, but some of our patient researchers who have dedicated their lives
Excellent point.
to being our advocates and taking the huge risk of getting involved in early research.
Excellent point.
The other thing, before I figure out what I'm supposed to be talking about, is that there's one situation in particular where I think there's a pain control device that's over the counter. It's a wearable. It's a great product, and it's the people that I've talked to find it highly effective. The challenge there is that these are scientists running a company, and the supply chain is god awful. You can't rely on getting the product in a timely manner, and it's a refillable razor blade model. So that's an important component, and their failure to run the company properly is actually putting people in actual pain. So, and now what am I supposed to
That
talk
doesn't
about?
matter. Ranu, I don't know if Ranu's online, but had a suggestion yesterday. I think she posted it on the group chat. Ranu, are you online? I don't think. We lost her. Okay. Well, if she comes back,
Jimmy Abbas is on. He might.
Is Jimmy online?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, but Jimmy may not. I don't think Jimmy was here yesterday, so he may not know what Ronnie said. I think what it had to do with is, hey, can we set aside funds at the outset, kind of an insurance program? It doesn't necessarily have to be built in to the cost of the clinical trial. Maybe it's government subsidized, but the point is, some money is set aside as an insurance program that protects the end user. CMS might be able to administer something like this, where they are the insurer of last resort for someone who's left in the lurch in the case of a device that needs to be supported. Of course, you'd have to find the contractor, but presumably that would be possible. Jeremy, do you have any thoughts on ideas to help address this problem?
I certainly do, and I think we got to make distinguish between implantable devices, and that's where there's really big problems versus a company like Enera, where had a good product that benefits folks. But when you look at, for instance, Nuvectra, when they ran into trouble, they actually did set aside money, and they did the responsible thing to care for these individuals after the company went out of business. There was a time, Victor, you probably remember this during the cochlear implant days, going back to that same problem where when Advanced Bionics had all these cracked cases, and the future of Advanced Bionics really was questionable, and Cochlear Corporation stepped in to make an offer to buy all these individuals that had to be explanted and so forth. You know what their price was? $0. Because they were taking on the liability. For those that know Al Mann, he just laughed at them, and of course created the second largest cochlear corporate company in the world. But it is a liability. It is expensive, particularly when you're dealing with implantable devices. And when companies go out of business and you need an explant, hospitals sometimes who are performing the surgery, they eat that cost. And so, companies, I think, need to set aside funds. I don't know if there are insurance policies out there that you can get to cover against these type of things, but it's a serious problem when it comes to implantable devices because the cost of explant and taking care of these patients can be a lot.
Yes, good point. And I'm glad you brought up Nuvectra, because that is another recent example of an implanted device company that's failed despite having a therapy that's successful, that the users were happy with. I want to throw one other idea out there, and then we're running low on time. But and that has to do with IP. obviously a company goes out of business, there still is value to their IP. And I want to give an example from the previous decade. There was a company called Cyberkinetics, which had developed the original BrainGate system and Neuroport. And they had several users who were very happy with that device, but it was a tough market to compete in. The size of the market wasn't huge in terms of the number of users, which is unfortunate. You know, it was a similar issue with neurocontrol. So even though you've got a successful device, the company's just not making enough money and they go out of business. Well, now what happens to BrainGate after Cyberkinetics goes out of business? Well, the hardware gets picked up by BlackRock, and we're going to hear later today from the CEO of BlackRock. Marcus, are you on now? If no, he's not. But we're going to hear from him later, so maybe we can quiz him on that subject. So BlackRock picked up the hardware, but what about the underlying BrainGate technology? Well, that IP got picked up for a song by an individual who maintained the rights to the BrainGate website and the trademark, et cetera. And what that forced the researchers in this area to do is to create a consortium called BrainGate 2, which was really where the work was getting done, where the support for some of those clinical trial participants. And this was Brown University and Metro General and Case Western and Stanford and Spalding. And these were nonprofit organizations that stepped up to try and carry the ball forward, even though they weren't in it to make money. On the other hand, a commercial firm, walks away with the IP that potentially could be worth something. And so I'm thinking maybe there should be some form of legislation or some form of allowance in the bankruptcy court, that says that those implanted users, they're like employees. They go to the top of the chain when it comes to the creditor list. And if there's any IP, any value to the IP, well, that should be used to support those users. So that's just a thought that I wanted to throw out there. Anyone have a reaction to that, either positive or negative?
Jim, if I could jump in here real quick.
Sure.
Before we're completely out of time, is that, here's the thing I think we have to think about in terms of an industry as a whole, is you mentioned it. We can either regulate ourselves or be regulated upon. So I think it behooves us to be able to come up with a solution that we can actively manage before we have to start to look at regulation and it gets that bad. So I think it behooves us to be able to build a consortium somehow to be able to address this issue. But we also always talk about the challenges of patient adoption and clinical adoption. And that's not going to happen until, particularly when we're talking about implanted devices, that trust is not going to happen until we can put in some assurances, because that doubt is always going to be in the back of the mind of not only the patients or consumers that are getting these devices implanted, but also the clinicians that refer them.
Thanks, Jen. A very good point. We've got time for one more comment. And Jimmy Abbas, I think you had something you wanted to say. Why don't you go ahead?
I just entered that into the chat, but this, about the issue of supporting people that have an implant after the company or the federally funded project, expires. I think, there's a difference between explanting the device. That cost is fairly predictable, I would argue, and providing ongoing support. If the person has a device and they like it and they want to keep using it, but there are external components, there's software, there's configuring the device, all that has to happen. That I think is it's a bigger challenge, and it's I think a shame if we end up giving people the choice of saying, well, you can keep it and, let's hope things work, or we can explant it now, so that was just my two different issues I see it as.
No, absolutely. It's a great point, and thank you for bringing it up, because it is a bigger problem longer term without companies being able to support those patients. There's no one out there.
Okay, well, thanks very much. So that concludes the 2020 edition of our editorial roundtable. I want to thank everyone for participating. We tried this for the first time last year, and it seemed to go over well. It was a little bit of a free-for-all, but hopefully at next year's Neurotech Leaders Forum, we can follow up on some of these issues. And of course, during our dialogues later on today, we may well be able to follow up on some of them as well. With that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. It's an entrepreneur, presenter,